All right, I'll make a start. Is anyone here not for the workshop still? It's okay. You can chill. Okay, so I think we're gonna talk. I know the workshop is called AI tools, but I think what we're doing is approaching it a bit differently than some of your studios might have approached it. Can I just get an idea of what ateliers you guys are in, or what year group? BA3. Anyone else? Adaptive reuse. Okay. So I think CPU has a slightly different approach because what I want to talk about today really is doing to treat AI slightly differently to how you might have approached in the past. So just an introduction. Obviously working with ADD, but I also work in the private practice. We do both new builds, adaptive reuse, stuff like that, but we're a fairly small practice. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of more practically when you have not a lot of time, whether it's at university, whether it's in your career, when you don't have a lot of time to experiment, when you're not a firm that, like Zaha or some of the bigger conceptual firms where you're using AI to deliver really conceptual stuff, how do you use AI as part of your day-to-day use? I assume we're all familiar with Reba's stages of work. The reason I want to talk about it, starting with this, is when you're working, so the things to consider, whether it's the concept design, analyzing your site, all that stuff. What you don't want to be doing is you're trying to do all this stuff and you're encountering errors, you're encountering inefficiencies, and you're struggling and you're fighting your software more than you are designing. If you ever used the software and thought to yourself, if only there was a way to do this, or if only this software worked a little bit more like this other software, or if only this thing is just slightly different. And really that's what I want to talk about, because again, I feel like, whether it's the work I do or whether it's the work in university, you want to be designing, you want to be delivering things, you want to be doing the things you're actually here to do, which is design. But a lot of times you're spending your time troubleshooting software, trying to do really tedious things over and over. And what's the solution to that? Well, I think when you're a star architect, you have a pretty easy solution for that, which is you do your design, right? You do your very nice conceptual stuff. You work on the design, and then you get a team of part ones and part twos to realize your design. And that works great for them, but not everyone has. Obviously, we don't have that resource. We don't have a team of people that's going to work for us to realize that. So that's what I'm here to talk about. And that's why the title, think like a coder. It's missing an R. So you can keep designing. Has anyone used AI in their design? How have you used it in the past?
I used it to create some kind of visuals, prototypes, and storyboards.
Yeah. Okay. What about you? You said.
We use like
Korea. Okay. Yeah. So I think when we talk about AI in our workflow, I don't know if in other ateliers or in other workshops it's been mentioned, but the university does take a certain stance about AI and AI production. And I think from my perspective, the stance that the uni takes is, I agree with it. I think the idea is what you don't want to do is just use AI to create output, pass it on as your own work, and you call it a day. So, just generating an image, passing it off, generating some text, sending it in as your own work, that's not what we're here to do. And I think you're also just not learning anything when you're doing that. So what we don't want to do is just use AI as output. So I think then a lot of ateliers or a lot of the work you do will go a step beyond that, right? You use some renders, but you're going to use in the concept stage. You're going to use it to create some ideas. You're going to use it to test out some scenarios. You generate text, but then you're reading through the text and you're rewriting that and stuff like that. Maybe you're doing a bit of code with it and you're editing the code. So I think that's what we find in university most of the time you're doing. You're doing a bit of work, the AI is doing a bit of work, you're putting it together, you're delivering it. But I think what's important is to always go back to what you might hear about a lot, which is whether it is at university or in your work, architecture really isn't about output. Given a single final render, a single floor plan without understanding how you get there isn't really the point. And I think because of that, I think the problem with a lot of how we use AI, I mean, it's great the ways we currently use AI, but it's lacking a big part of it, which is how do we actually use it as part of our processes. And by process, I don't just mean you're going to generate an image, you're going to change it, and you're going to generate another image. So today, we're going to give you a few examples. I know we can do some hands-on stuff. We're not that many people, so we can play around with our time a bit more. So there's a few places, and these all come from real examples I use at work. So AutoCAD scripts, SketchUp, InDesign, and I'm creating your own applications with AI. Again, the approach I take is going to be quite different to the approach that you learn at a lot of ateliers, because when I'm working, there's a time limit. I don't have hours to just store around. I don't have hours to, well, to be frank, learn how to code and troubleshoot everything. So what I'm doing is just to take away the friction in my design. So in the session, I'm going to be using ChatGPT prompts and stuff like that. And because we all know how ChatGPT can be with updates and stuff, I'm going to actually go through some of the chat history rather than prompting it live, just so we don't run into network issues and it generating something unexpected. So I think the first example I want to show you, and it's up to you whether you want to follow along or you want to just watch, because I think from my perspective, there isn't too much difference. It's just which way you learn a bit better. So this was, again, all these problems are based on real projects I've been working on. And this was a project where it was creating a series of apartments. On each floor, there were 2 apartments. They were mirrored. And on each floor, the apartment layout is slightly different, but they're mostly the same. But the 2 sides of the apartment, they're always mirrored. And you know, it was a fairly trivial task to begin with. You're drawing your layout. You know, we're not going to go into detail what we're actually designing. This isn't obviously how you're supposed to use AutoCAD, but you might start with a layout on one side. And what I was doing was creating, it was a very presentational document, it was a feasibility study. The idea was for it to be visually impactful and pleasing. So I was creating custom text boxes for this. So we were making room labels. And instead of just standard room labels, I mean, this wasn't the exact design, but they were a bit different. So you have a layout, you have a bunch of labels, great. Now we need to mirror it. And obviously the issue here is all the room labels get flipped. Again, this problem might sound trivial, but I think the point I want to get across is how we use AI for little problems like this, right? Because on a bigger plan, each side of the room had 20, 30 labels. I don't want to be flipping them individually. And you may know that if it's just text, it's a bit of a different story. If say it was just text, and you mirrored it. If you don't want the text mirrored, you can actually type in mirror text, set that to 0, and it doesn't mirror the text anymore. But that doesn't work with blocks. So the solution I had was to make a custom script for this, and we're going to look at the script I had. So this is the actual script I was doing. This was the actual ChatGPT conversation as I ran into this problem in real time. I asked AutoCAD, and we can try this live. We'll see what result we get. So create an AutoCAD script. What was it? To flip each object on their own middle axis. We'll see if this is quick enough for me to do this in real time. If not, I'll run through what was done in the past. We'll just use the example from the past. So what it produced me was a AutoLisp script. So if you've not used scripts in the past in AutoCAD, there's 2 ways to use the script that it gives you. So one way is you can directly paste it in, or you can type in upload, paste the script into a Notepad, save this as a Lisp file, and load it from there. And if you do it that way, it opens every time. But just for this purpose, all I was doing is taking the script it's given me, pasting into AutoCAD. So you won't see it do anything. You see some commands, but it would have been inputted. And you can see that the command it's using is called flip each x. So we can make a few copies of So again, in this scenario, I was mirroring the rooms across with the room labels. Right, source objects, no. And I'm selecting the labels, and I'm running the command flip each x. So as you can see, there is an error, and it's asking me to scale the text, which isn't obviously what I asked it to do. What I asked was for a single command to flip everything I've selected along its center, right, which would have flipped the labels around to the right side. So what I was doing in this case, I was feeding it back the error messages I was getting. So you can tell exactly what error you're getting, and then you're getting a new script. And I'm just going to fast forward through this bit, but I've done that a few times. And in the end, I'm just going to restart AutoCAD just to make sure it's. So again, I'm just creating this as example to test the code. So again, just copying the code, pasting it in, and well, let's recreate the scenario. Flip each x. And you can see that it's, well, so what happened there was it's looking for the geometric center of each shape and flipping it, and the text box is a bit long. So if I correct that, and we run the command again, it's flipping the text boxes in its middle. And again, it might seem very trivial to do that. You can just flip them manually. But that command alone saved me a lot of time in this project. So that's one example. Does that all make sense, what I've done there? Does that make sense? Yeah. And again, I mean, in your own work, you're not necessarily going to have the exact same scenarios, but I think the message is, again, you run into these little frictions or things that might feel very tedious, and using ChatGPT to create some tools that's going to help you. So for the next example, it's something I was running into when I was laying out some pages in InDesign. So I had a set of floor plans, and we'll let InDesign load. So this is a project. It was a fairly simple project. It was the adaptive reuse of a public house. So it's adaptive reuse of public house. Again, a fairly quick document for feasibility study. And it was testing out a layout to convert into a residential building. And this is part of a much bigger document which tested different options. So this is one of the options. So something I had to do repeatedly in that document was having this little schedule bar update to all the pages. So I wanted that to show up on any page. Well, it should have showed up. And again, the actual document was a lot longer. But we're going to use this snippet because it's easier to show what I was doing. So obviously the kind of the longer way to do this is you can just copy and paste it into each page. And then you have it on each page. But I was doing this a lot, and I was noticing that I was doing this on a lot of different projects. I was designing a schedule tab, wanting it on the floor plans. So to do that, we can do this live because it's a bit easier of a task. So what I wanted was for a selected object to be on every page that was a floor plan. It can be the actual script was a bit different because I had different options, and obviously each schedule will only go to those options. For this task, again, breaking down the logic, I want the object was selected to go on each page that said floor plan. But I want it to be a bit customizable, so it'll be great if the script gives me a way to type in what I want the script to find, so what pages it needs to go on. So what I asked was create an InDesign script that pastes, that copies, and pastes the selected object in the same place on pages should match a user. Let's try this as a prop text box. So it was something along the lines of this script. We can look it up if there's any problems with this. And again, the reason I do it this way is because I don't, in my actual workflow, I don't really want to stop my design process, start coding something, troubleshoot the code a few times, get the code to work, a few hours later, go back to designing. This whole process creating this script, whenever I did it, was a few minutes. So I made the script, I went back to it, and again, the idea is just taking out the friction. Because again, going back to that phrase of, I want to be doing design. I don't want to be doing these tedious tasks and breaking me out of doing design. So having the script meant that when I was laying out these pages, the design part is designing the layout, designing the schedule tab, and the script will do everything else. Let's actually have the output in English, sorry. So while this is generating, I think like the AutoCAD script, you can ask ChatGPT, and ChatGPT does explain to you how to use this script anyway. But like a ChatGPT script, once you get the script, what it'll ask you to do is save it into a JavaScript file, and you'll load it in. This is on InDesign through Windows Utility Scripts, and it sits here. So you have that script tab open. You can go to the part where it says User, Reveal in Explorer, and it shows you where you need to put the script. Again, if you don't know how to do it, you can just ask ChatGPT to explain to you exactly how to use the script. So I'm just pasting that code into a Notepad file, save as, change the type to all files, and it's our name is selected pages, paste in place, .jsx, and let's just check where that file location is. So that should give me that JavaScript there, which you can see. So I'm just going to select what I want it to do, and we'll run it, and we'll see what happens. So I'm just making sure it did let me pages. So I think in this case, it's asking me to put in the page number, but what I actually want is search for the text. So what I actually want to do is I don't want to tell it which pages it needs to go on. I want it to look for a specific bit of text, and if that text exists on that page, I want it to be pasted there. So specifically for this task, I want to be able to type in floor plan, and any page that has floor plan, paste the schedule onto that page. So, I mean, I'll just cheat it a little bit because I do have the script that that's needed. So again, this was the conversation whenever I ran into this, which was just 2 prompts. So if I select this, run this, I should be able to type in floor plan. I think it's case sensitive. Oh, well, you can choose if it's case sensitive. And what it did was paste schedule to every page that contains the word floor plan. Does that make sense? Yeah? No? Maybe? Okay. But yeah, again, that's example how it could be used. And just going to the third one. So the third example, the SketchUp example, is a bit hit or miss. You can use ChatGPT for SketchUp plugins, because what you'll find is, I mean, how many people here use SketchUp? Nobody. Okay. Maybe we'll move on to the next thing if no one used SketchUp. There's no point me running through it. So I think the example of HTML software, I've only started doing this recently as well. But again, I found it quite useful. So what I was doing, so there's a few things. Again, as the previous example, identifying something that I do a lot. So something I do a lot is merging PDF files. And I think we should all know how to merge some PDF files. You can have the files open, drag and drop them in. Or you can use Acrobat to merge them. But there was a point where for a project I was doing a lot of it. There's a lot of documents from consultants I need to merge, sent out, and I couldn't be asked opening this every time. So what I did was, again, I've only recently started doing this, but what I was doing was asking ChatGPT to create for me an HTML app, and for the HTML app to have just a single function. I drop some files in, it gives me an output, it exports the file that's been merged, and it's usable immediately. So this was the prompt that was used: create an HTML app that runs locally. The app should have a place in the middle to drop multiple files. Then the PDFs will be merged into a single file. Let the user choose the new name and location. And then when the files are dropped, play a cool rippling animation and show a loading bar. I mean, the last two parts was just to show what it can do. So this was the output from ChatGPT. And if we just find some PDF files. So again, I know there's a lot of online tools you can do this. You can do this in Acrobat, but I just thought it would be easiest for me to have something to hand. And it's also just kind of fun having your own little software. And I'll merge the PDFs. So I mean, it was as simple as that. That was a simpler example of what we can do. Again, just a very, very basic prompt. I think what's important is be very, surely you've heard this in other lectures, but be very specific on what you wanted to do. So specifically, I wanted to run locally, so I don't want it to upload my PDFs to anywhere. And then specifically a drag and drop interface. So that was much quicker for me to use. And with the same idea, creating a little HTML app, there's a much more complex example I was using for a project recently. So as part of my work, a lot of projects are in the feasibility stage. So we might have a client who has a plot of land and they want to understand what they could do with the plot of land, whether they should hold it, whether they should just sell it as land, or maybe there's some opportunity. And obviously from our perspective, we would like to explore if there's any opportunity. It's a bit of a problem-solving exercise of how do we take a plot of land and make it profitable by building something that adds value to that plot of land. And that used to be an easier task, and it's currently a bit more challenging because build cost is going up, and house prices aren't rising as much. Good for buyers, but not great for clients of architects, I guess. And obviously, it also depends on your location. What you find a lot of times is there'll be locations where house prices varies a lot, but the build price is almost exactly the same, because at the end of the day, you're working with the same materials and the same contractors and man hours. So what I wanted to do, what I noticed I was doing a lot on these projects was using ChatGPT to research build prices, to research the local market, and try to figure out what to design in places. And it started with a project in Wigan. So if anyone knows anything about Wigan, it's not the most developed area. It's a lot of industrial stuff, and it's actually popular because it's very cheap to rent. So a lot of companies base their, a lot of trade-related companies base their warehouses there. But because of that, a lot of property, you see quite low prices. So for this project, we were taking a piece of land. So that was the land. It's where the cars are parked, basically. It's a really unique site. Just that strip of land where the cars are parked. There's a car wash on one side. The car wash are parking the cars there illegally, which would be claimed back. And there was a few challenges. So, for example, the car wash is, in theory, a potential development location. So in theory, something could be developed over that car wash, because car wash are often seen as a temporary function to a piece of land. So again, just identifying the challenges. You got a site, you got a very noise industrial use. It's a very tricky site because you've got a major road into town, well, one way into Wigan, the other way into Manchester. So you can't have car parking off of Warrington Road, or your car parking need to come off the minor road. And it was trying to navigate all these challenges. So for this, we did a few variations of design. So one option was 2 or 3 story townhouses. They've developed a bit from this, but just four houses on a plot of land. The next option was a set of apartments. The third set of apartments with retail on the bottom. And then the fourth is an office. So what we then did is we took all this information, and we brought it to a consulting company who were able to figure out the profitability of each of these sites. Now, we've done a horrible job because they're not profitable. You're losing quite a bit of money on the apartments. You're making 33K on offices, which I think you wouldn't get out of bed for that if you own a piece of land that's worth quite a bit of money. And on houses, you're losing a bit of money too. So we then had a conversation with this consulting firm, and they were giving us the advice that there's a few ways you can do this. Put more apartments on, which is difficult from a planning perspective because everything around us is 2 or 3 stories. Or try to squeeze more houses in there, which is actually possible. So the reason I was talking about this project, this isn't actually the project I used AI on. This was the project before that. Having done this project, what I realized was there's a gap in what we can do, I guess, as architects. If I had this information before I did the design, that would have been much more useful. Right? If I knew this information and then I designed it to fit this information, rather than designing something with no information. And I mean, these were guesses, right? These were almost as good as guesses how big these apartments need to be, and you're making this guess, and you're giving to someone who knows the stuff, and then you're wishing that you just got this information beforehand. So from this project, we then had a few other projects where we had the same task: a plot of land. Do you think you can make it profitable? So I thought to myself, well, let's not make the same mistake again. There's no point for me to just sit here, do a bunch of design, not really understand if it's going to be profitable or not, and then be told it's not profitable. So what I started doing was, so I found myself on whether it's Google, whether it's ChatGPT, asking a lot of questions like, let's take an imaginary site. Can someone suggest an area in Manchester? Any? Ancoats, Salford, whatever. Salford? Ancoats? Okay. Well, let's find some land in Ancoats, or something we can develop over. I mean, actually, we'll take that bit of land opposite to Liddell. I assume we all recognize it. Big plot of land opposite Liddell. It's currently going to be government offices. They're going to start construction soon, but we'll just take that for this task. I would love a postcode. So we'll take the Audi postcode because I just want information about the area. So what I found myself doing a lot was asking questions like average house prices around a postcode. Because what I wanted to figure out was if we can figure out the average construction price, if we can figure out the average house price, we can then start figuring, I will love this in English. We can then start having that inform some of our decisions. Obviously, this isn't the point of today's workshop, searching something on ChatGPT. But I realize this process is getting quite tedious because I'm doing a lot of research on the price. I'm doing a lot of research on, I'm just sitting here doing a bunch of research, and then I would try to put something on paper, and I realize I don't have enough information. I'll come back to do more research. And also recognizing that this research I'm doing is very proximate. At the end of the day, I'm not going to have as much information as real estate agents or companies that consult on construction as their day job. So what I wanted to do was create a tool for myself that only gave me the high-level information that helped inform my design. So specifically, we had another project, and coincidentally, it's almost the same brief. There's a car park. What can we do with it? Now, I know from reading the previous development report that the suggestion seems to be with a tight site like that, townhouses are the best construction cost to sale value. Well, the question is, how do you put them on? And I think if you ask each atelier how you might design the design, you might get different answers. But the bigger question is, no matter what I do, it has to be profitable for the project to even begin. And the design comes secondary to making sure the project is profitable. So the most important thing I had to figure out was how many units are we going to fit on there, how many stories, the townhouses, so they can be a bit more lacking in front and rear garden. But the important thing was the size of houses. So what I wanted was a tool where I can put in a postcode, and I can put in postcode and get this information out. And this was very much a trial and error exercise, because the initial information I gave was this drawing, and then I had to get some information from somewhere. So I found so I found this information online: UK housing prices. And it looks something like this. But going through this data, I realized it's not actually that useful for me, because of a few reasons. It uses the land registry's area code, which doesn't correlate to postcode almost at all. It gives me prices, but in terms of detached, semi-detached, and terraced, which again isn't as useful for me because I want to actually understand a bit more than just the prices. I want to understand the prices in terms of whether it's an apartment or a house, how many bedrooms, and this information isn't there. So that's where I started with, and this is the app it built for me. But just with what I said, the challenge was that the information didn't have any of these data, right? So the app it built for me was a way for you to upload some information. You tell the app which row in the Excel spreadsheet correlates to what type of data, and it outputs what's relevant. Again, in my spreadsheet, nothing actually correlated to this. So what I needed was for ChatGPT to actually give me a hand creating a high-level data set from scratch. So, apologies, that's in Chinese. But what I asked was if you can create a data set based on information available online that suits the columns that the apps are asking for. And I wanted ideally to use market data, but it said it couldn't use live market data. And it was going to use publicly available data, and it was going to use a methodology for estimating how the prices might change depending on location. So I said that's great, and because it's high-level information, we're not going to use the whole postcode. We're just going to use the first 3 letters of the postcode to generalize the areas. But I realize there's a problem, which is it's going to take a lot of effort to actually get this data set to work for the whole country, and there's going to be many places that doesn't have enough information. So I decided let's just do it to Manchester for now. Let's just do the postcodes that are in Manchester. And what I wanted again, is information that correlated to my output. So I wanted to have house type. I wanted to have cost, number of bedrooms, number of stories, footprint, and I'll explain these footprint options. So what it produced for me was this data set, which is postcode, house type, price, bedrooms, stories, and footprint, which is exactly what I needed. So if we use that data set instead and match up the information to what we want to see, and we can type in a postcode. And what it does is it gives me a drop down, and for different types of units, well, it tells me the general information, but it also tells me the footprint, which is actually the key of what I needed. By knowing the footprint, I can then start planning out what size these houses would be. And I just asked for it to give me a few ways to give me some options of footprints for me to work with. So I know roughly if I keep the house within these sizes, I'll be in the right ballpark. And what's interesting is you can actually have this conversation with ChatGPT. So it's not just about asking it to do something, which I was asking it to explain to me the logic of how it came up with the prices. Because what it did is it used average prices in Manchester, and then through that, try to come up with the logic of how to estimate prices for different areas in Manchester. So what it did was first try to figure out what each types of unit says about the unit, and look at and dividing Manchester into a few regions. So the city center within the busy areas, and then everywhere else within the inner ring of Manchester, everything outside of the ring, and then whatever doesn't fit in that doesn't get accounted for. And it's adding a multiplier based on each of them, which is great, which is very useful for me to understand its logic, because what I can then do is check over the information myself, right? I can take the default prices, the default average, take that information. I can then look up some apartments, some houses in the city center that matches different postcode. I have a look at the multipliers myself, and if I'm happy with the multipliers, I can keep using this tool as it is. If I'm not happy with the multipliers, I can have a conversation with ChatGPT on maybe altering the multipliers a little bit or changing the logic of how it determines it. And then it was a similar thing about the footprint of houses. So the assumption is we take an average of house footprint in Manchester, and then we're assuming that the closer it is to a city center, the smaller, well, it's going to be slightly smaller. If it's outside the city center, it's going to be slightly bigger. And from there, I'm basically having a conversation with it to try to narrow down the information, the logic a bit more. Does that make sense, what I was doing there? So I guess how do I run this script? It's so So the reason I wanted to be HTML app is an HTML app can run one within a single file without referencing other files. And that, yeah, it does just run. So this is, oh, here we go. So it gives you the output as code, but you can just download it, and it just runs as HTML file. And I would say it's a bit hit or miss, because without getting more technical into the code itself, you do just need to try and error what it can or cannot do. So I try to have it add a function where it was compressing images for me. But that process it's a lot more complicated than I initially thought, so it didn't end up working. But just simple tasks, that worked fine. And again, when I was making, for example, SketchUp add-ons, I tried to create a SketchUp add-on where it will turn lines into tubes. So you draw a bunch of polygonal lines, and it'll convert that into tubes, so it looks like a structure, right? A steel-based structure. I don't use Blender, no. But I could see easily doing the same thing with Blender to create a little script. Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And it's honestly just treating ChatGPT like a conversation rather than you tell it to do something. And I think one of the prompts I used a lot that I think most people don't use enough is, so say you're creating a plugin for Blender. You can give it a command, but sometimes I will add to my command something along the lines of, if there's any more information you need to know, or if there's any ambiguity, ask me those questions one by one. So it will then ask you what is missing from your prompt, essentially. So you don't need to just sit there and read 5 books on prompt engineering. Just have it tell you what information that it wants to know from you. So that's what I wanted to show. I was going to show a SketchUp bit as well, but I guess if no one uses SketchUp, it might not be as useful. Hello.
Sorry, just walking past.
So was that useful to you guys? Yeah. Was there any questions about any of it? Yeah, but this is, so I think I might have not done a good job explaining what I was doing, but when you see the code, that's really big and spooky and scary. I have no idea what the code is.
So you don't have to know
I don't know any of the code I wrote, but what I do know is I treat myself as I let ChatGPT be the one that knows how to code, but I give it feedback. So, for example, you see that on a few of the examples. So, for example, like in here, I asked for it to do something for me, right? It's very simple. Write me a script that does this. That's all I know, because I don't code. I don't know how it will do it. It gives me a code. I don't know what the code is doing. I'm just downloading the code and I'm running it. And I run it and I see what happens. Does it do what I've asked it to do? it didn't, and it gave me an error that said this. So I tell it the error that it gave me. And it tries to identify what's going on in the code, and it tries to fix it. So I then take the new code that it gives me, I run it again. And what was happening was the image, I was running the code, and again, it wasn't doing what I was asking it to do. So again, all I'm doing is just telling ChatGPT again what the problem is. And well, I stopped giving it problems because the code was fine. So after saying that, the code it gave me worked fine. So great. And again, from my perspective, I'm not here to code. I'm here to design. So if there's and the reason I use code is to solve these little moments of friction. So if there's a friction that takes more effort to solve by code than to just do it, then I just do it. And if there is a fairly easy way to solve it with code, then I solve it with code. Yeah, like I mean, I have the tiniest bit of coding background, but none of the code that I've been generating for architecture, I actually understand at all, to be honest. But I think that's something that's great, which is you don't have to be kind of put off and intimidated by all the coding you need to do. Because in the past, if you wanted your own little SketchUp plugin, if you wanted your own little add-on for AutoCAD, for Blender, for Rhino, you would need to go take a week, 2 weeks, many more weeks to learn how to code, troubleshoot it, have someone who hopefully knows a bit more, have you have this plugin running finally at the end. And you don't always have the time to do that. And because you don't always have the time to do that, you probably end up not doing it most of the time. But now you have a easy way to get something that just get you back into focusing on design. And again, the mail merge, the PDF merge thing as well, I was fed up with needing to have Acrobat open and going through the Acrobat interface. So I just built something really quick that I can just drop files into and it'll merge them for me. Does that help a little bit about the coding side being a bit intimidating? Yeah.
So for different like applications,
Mm-hmm.
like the type of like some are like Java, some are like Python, some are like
Yeah.
It's like you have to know sort of which one is used.
No, I mean I mean to a point, because for example, if you're trying to run a script on InDesign, you can tell it's the JavaScript. If not, you can just ask ChatGPT what language it needs to be in. Yeah. In theory, anything that. But I think again, once you start doing it a little bit, it's almost like the process of learning to code, because you start understanding the logic that you need to explain to ChatGPT. And
It's weird coding in like a higher language. Kind of like coding in the higher.
yeah, well, so people call it vibe coding,
Yeah.
which is, well, you're not really coding. You're just trying to get outputs from it instead of doing the technical side. But yeah, I think I'll wrap it up here. Well, I might as well go through the SketchUp example anyway, because this is being recorded. Feel free if you want to follow along or not. So before I wrap up, was there any other questions? No, we're all happy.
Do you happen to use any other AI agent besides ChatGPT?
A few, but not for this purpose. Yeah, I use a few for image generation. But then even, again, when I use it for image generation, most of the time what I'll do is have it do part of a render for me. So on a few projects there's a really good example of So this is a project I did, and this was one of the renders. And the render itself was done into Emotion. But then the Corten texture and then the scene inside was done on ChatGPT, I think. Because the idea was we knew what the terrace was going to be. It really didn't matter what went into it because it's a planning application. But we wanted something nice looking. So it was literally doing a render. It was doing a render, cropping the middle of the render out, and then replacing the glass with what I rendered. And the render is literally cropped like this around the carpets and around the objects. Some of the other renders as well, it just has a little bit of AI in it. I know a lot of the research and a lot of putting a document together, and it's a lot of just fun little AI scripts. It's again what I found was the way to use AI that a lot of people aren't doing. Yeah. Anything else?
I want to ask the
Yeah.
HTML one, because you made the merging PDF thing.
Yeah.
It's not just HTML. I think the code is because it says it probably is HTML is for the interface, and it also has JavaScript for
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the code it's actually quite complex.
Yeah, it's more than HTML, but HTML was the container file it was in. That's why I said HTML.
So inside actual functions it runs in JavaScript.
Yeah, and it calls so well. Because what was interesting is again it describes. If you look into the thought, which is quite useful, it describes what it's doing, right? It describes how it's putting it together, and it does. So it uses React with HTML, and then it's calling actually some external libraries that handles the actual merging and stuff. So it's not. I mean, I asked it to make it local, but seeing that it's calling external functions. It probably isn't local. I probably can't run it offline.
Yeah.
But it also didn't. I mean, it didn't really matter for the purpose. Oh yeah. I mean, it says you can download the library if you want, and then try to run it locally. But again, I think this was really useful because before I did this, I knew nothing about. Well, I didn't really know how it was going to work, but then understanding its logic of how to put the software together, it gives you an idea of what you can add to the software or what else you could do with it. And again, it's a process of having a little conversation with GPT rather than just giving it specific tasks. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here. And